My conversation today is with Alison Chicosky, practitioner, author, and founder of the brand Practical Occult, which specializes in spellwork and the production of implements and items for ritual and spellcraft. As a magical entrepreneur, Alison draws from a broad background of rigorously studied ancient arts, leveraging the systems of the past for practical modern use. We sat down to discuss some of her latest work, perspectives on magic, working with the Greek Magical Papyri or PGM, and more. I'm Ike Baker, and this is the Arcanum Podcast.
Great. You really kind of dove into the PGM stuff and found your niche there, huh?
You know, I love the PGM because it really is shrouded in mystery. And in that mystery, there's real thaumaturgy, real miracle working. Mm-hmm. I just love looking into that.
Yeah. And I really, I enjoy, some of the stuff that you and I have talked about just because it is one of the more dense and intimidating manuals to go by, if it can even be called that, just because of the difference in translation and, the fragmentary nature of some of it. And really, anytime I took a look at it, I was referencing, Skinner's Techniques of Greco-Egyptian Magic, because for me to open up the Betts version that I have and look at it, it's difficult to make heads or tails because, correct me if I'm wrong, but these were essentially kind of like, the people using these things, these would be their personal notes, but there's, is there commentary or were you just supposed to already know the theory behind it and already be, well versed?
Yeah. So David Frankfurter has some interesting commentary on that about, who was doing this magic. And he wrote about that in Ritual Expertise in Rome and Egypt and the problem of the category magician. Mm-hmm. So he mentions that a small number of scholars have begun to notice that the PGM is not a random collection of spells, but an anthology of grimoires, of ritual manuals, and that the largest portion of this is made up of a single library, which was the production of a single group of scribes writing in both Demotic Egyptian and Greek, which was found in Thebes and brought up in one group. So in trying to understand the context of the spells in late antique culture, we must therefore look at the context of such ritual libraries, particularly ones found in temple cities like Thebes and written partly in languages impenetrable to the broader Greco-Egyptian populace, like Demotic and Old Coptic. So that's actually what we have here. We've got some Old Coptic in PGM 4, which is the text that this comes from. And it was considered to be part of the Magical Papyri of Paris. Mm-hmm. And Julia Sfameni Gasparo wrote about that, saying that, in fact, given the nature of the numerous sections that compose it, in which ritual instructions from time to time express the aims that one intends to realize, the first and most obvious conclusion is that if considering the texts, also due to its format as a small and easily handled book, as a manual for a magical practitioner, a sort of a handbook suitable for responding all of the needs of his customers. So that's specifically about PGM 4, which is the papyri that we've got the Secrets of Helios as a single spell out of this broader book.
That was very informative. But so to start off, you're the proprietor of Practical Occult. Is that correct?
That is correct.
So can you tell me a little bit about how you got started? You and I, we've had a couple of conversations off screen, but I don't think we ever really talked in depth about how this particular endeavor started.
Well, so making magic items was something that I was doing for much longer than I've had Practical Occult. I started Practical Occult in, like 4 years ago. But I probably never would have gone into being a professional sorceress like this if I hadn't been laid off of my career in tech and ops in the banking world. So, I fully thought that I was going to end my days and retire at this company that I'd been with for so long. But my whole team got swept up in the latest layoffs. And then as I was filling out applications and sending my resume, every email that I sent and every time I sent my resume, I just kind of cringed because I really didn't want to put on a suit and get on a train and commute to another city every day and then sit in a cubicle, doing stuff that kind of might be worthless, like to the, just busy work. I was still determined to get a job. So I kept sending those resumes, but as I was sending them, folks started to contact me and say, hey, the stuff that you post about making, can I buy it from you? So people reached out to me and asked if they could buy things. And then it kind of reached a critical mass of, is this a profession I could have? Could I keep doing this? And it turns out that the answer was yes.
That's excellent. And it's so kind of typical when you think about it, about having all these plans for your life, and then you just kind of fall into, I guess, sometimes if you lean in and you take that leap of faith, I guess, and capitalize on the opportunity, and you kind of fall into your life's work, I think, which is, it's really cool. When you move into traditions such as the ones that we work in, life has a way of reorganizing itself over time.
It's absolutely true, and this is something that I definitely noticed with planetary magic, especially which I also do. I do the Solomonic Pentacles and things like that. But when you do that sort of magic and you're working with these universal forces and bringing them into your life, they tend to remove obstacles. So that sounds all well and good, but what if your obstacle is your job that's actually holding you back from something that was better? Right. So a lot of people will be like, wow, I started doing this magic and my life blew up. My wife left me, I got fired, or like this, that, and the other. And it seems almost like they're cursed. But then if you check back with them like a year later, they're like, yeah, the affection had really gone out of my marriage like 20 years ago. And, we were just together because it was what we'd been doing. And I didn't really like my job and I was underpaid and blah, blah, blah. And then all of that stuff had to be removed to make way for what the universe was trying to bring into your life. So I definitely find that almost everyone I know who does this sort of magic, and I'm not even talking about theurgy necessarily. I'm talking about even for practical results, which is what I like to focus on, that those energies come into your life and they're really willing to clear out any old things that need to be cleared out to make way for the new.
Yeah. And I think that that's something that's very important for anybody that's, potentially interested in walking down a magical path, is that what you need to understand before you start working with the energies of the elements, the planets, the constellations in particular, is that you are making a choice. You're using your free will to call these things in and renovate you, regardless of your initial intentions. They're gonna, as you just said, it doesn't matter if you're doing theurgy, thaumaturgy, whatever you want to call it. You start working with these things, you're essentially, that's an intention that you're expressing, and you are a microcosm. So having any of those present, those universal energies, as you very aptly put it, is that it's going to bring to the fore that same pattern, that same force inside you. And there's a disposition that you naturally have, sort of this dynamic tension of all those planetary and elemental forces and zodiacal forces within your microcosm. And so they're going to react. It's like something getting inflamed in a lot of ways. But I think that's a really important point to make to people that are interested in getting involved in practical magic, because at least from my experience, it's like there's more people every hour that are just getting into this stuff. It's almost like we're living in a little bit of a renaissance for this.
Right. And sometimes I wonder if maybe I magically sabotaged my own job, because I kept petitioning for more money for my spirits. And the nature of my position was that I was salaried. And so I couldn't get any overtime. And I didn't have any sort of side job that I could pick up money from. So it was really running into this wall where I kept asking spirits for more money, and they were like, okay, but you can't do it at this employer. Like, so they had to take that away. And now that I have I'm self-employed, I've got my own business. It's really about me and what I want to invest in it, how much time I want to put into marketing, how much time I want to put into doing interviews, and put myself out there. So it's more self-directed, and it really removed that arbitrary salary cap where it's like, this is how much money you make, period.
Right. And that's another important thing to note about magic. There's I've heard it referred to before as the sphere of availability. So yeah, a lot of people are thinking like they have that very, I want to say, green perspective on things like magic, where it's like, yes, I'll do the ritual for money, and it'll come from the place where I'm expecting it, the most obvious place. But there's that sphere of availability, right? If there was a hard cap on your job, and for instance, maybe this was part of your life path, and it kind of redirected you, then that's exactly what's going to happen. And it's interesting that you mentioned that, because it's the reason why I'm in podcasting now and making YouTube videos is because I had been making very, very, very strong-willed petitions for the same reasons, right? I mean, we live in hard times right now. This is really, it's ridiculous, the cost of living. And I just wanted more stability in that department. And yeah, it was the same kind of thing. I kind of got pushed into doing this. There was a lot of support, and all the stuff just became available for free. I mean, I get this mic for a gift, the camera's a gift. It was just like, just kind of appeared like, here, do this.
Right. It's funny how everything you need can just fall into place like that when you start interacting with these forces. And then you look back and you're like, wow, it's kind of like I've been preparing this for 10 years and I didn't even realize it, because you see like your whole trajectory of, seemingly unrelated things that you studied years ago really feed into what you're doing now. Almost like there's a plan.
Yeah, right. Well, so you're right now, is it correct to assume that you're working within a primarily pagan magical paradigm? I mean, would you consider yourself those things? Is that how you identify what you do? Is it kind of spell crafting? Would you consider yourself a witch or a pagan, or is it something else?
So I do consider myself personally to be a pagan. My business card says sorceress. But I also answer to witch. Sorceress is actually French for witch, so not really much of a difference there. And so I do also work in a Christian paradigm, because a lot of the Solomonic magic that I do comes from that paradigm. But that's not my personal belief. Though I did grow up Protestant.
Okay, yeah, that makes total sense. Especially I mean, we can get to this later on, but I've always been curious, about the correlation between things like the Greek Magical Papyri, which we'll discuss, and the medieval and really Renaissance grimoire traditions. There's a tremendous amount of similarity in those things, in terms of phylactery and the binding and the calls, and things like that. But I do want to start right at the beginning with talking about the little treatise that you wrote. It has a translation from the Greek by Corey Child. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, and it's called The Secrets of Helios, Unlocking the Practical Uses of PGM4, 1596 to 1715, right? It was recently listed as essential reading in David Rankin's latest work, the Grimoire Encyclopedia. So before we get into that, could you maybe take a minute to explain the PGM to some listeners that might be unfamiliar with it?
Sure. So the PGM is a collection. So it stands for Papyri Greek Magicae, and it's usually called the Greek Magical Papyri, in English. And it's a collection of manuscripts that cover, a period of like 400-ish years. The time period of the texts encompasses about 100 BCE to about 400 CE. So they were penned after Alexander the Great came in and colonized Egypt, along with much of the Middle East. So his successor, Ptolemy I Soter, was declared pharaoh of Egypt, and that's the end of the Ptolemaic Empire is the beginning of the period that the PGM covers. So you've got all these manuscripts that were written in Greek, but they're Egyptian, and
Right.
it's because Greece had come in and said, like, okay, you guys are a colony of ours now, and you have to keep records in Greek. So for administrative purposes, all of the scribes had to learn Greek, and within like 250 years, everything was Greek. So you've got these diverse manuscripts that are, they were probably found in different places, but honestly, due to the antiquities trade, we really don't know a lot about them. So, for example, this one, PGM4, it's owned by Bibliothèque Nationale de France, but it's from the collection of Giovanni Anastasi, and it was purchased by the library in 1857. So before that, they don't really have, it's not like they can say, oh, it was specifically found in this tomb, or, this text was found from here, because all of that stuff was being looted by colonizers, and it was being sold on the open market, and eventually it got recognized for what it was and made its way to the hands of museums, which is where it is now. But a lot of people think of the PGM as a monolith because it was translated and packaged together in a series of books. Most recently, the Greek Magical Papyri, edited by Betts.
Right.
But it's actually a lot of different texts.
Yeah, so that's kind of that seems ambiguous to me even still, I know that we had talked a little bit about how to orient oneself towards this stuff. You've got Dr. Skinner on one hand, who insists that the his study of the PGM has yielded this kind of realization on his part that a lot of it was what he calls the techne, which is just a craft or a skill. And that these were kind of magicians for hire. And then I think that you kind of you introduced me to the ideas put forth by David Frankfurter, talking about how A lot of this stuff did come or a good portion of it came in one collection from Thebes, and so there's evidence there to suggest that they were actual working priests and stuff like that. But what do we have any historical data? Because I do understand that you're a scholar. Do we have any historical data that points towards like how do we contextualize these? And somebody who is as familiar with working the material, have you found it better to view them as a cohesive whole or a collection?
So I view it as a collection, and just a little disclaimer about my self-identification as a scholar. I'm an amateur scholar, so I don't have an Egyptology degree, and I do lean on folks like Jan Assman and David Frankfurter and folks like that to try to explain religion and theology in Egypt. But if you do look at these texts together, which I've spent many years doing, you can definitely see a lot of similar Egyptian theology and also like similar magical techniques that just keep coming up. And you'd mentioned before that there's also similarities with even later grimoires, like the Solomonic magic. And I do believe that in both cases, they come from priest magic. However, by the 4th century, which was when we have this text, and now whether or not the original was written in the 4th century, or if this is just we only have the copy of something and the copy was written in the 4th century, we'll never know. So we could, the origins of this are shrouded in mystery. But by the 4th century, Thebes, which was it was a temple city, was no longer receiving state funding because the state at that time was Rome. Like they were a Roman colony, so they weren't getting all the money that they were getting previously. So, I mean, it's very plausible that these priests who did have a lot of very practical spells to help their congregation, started doing that as a means to support their temples.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And Thebes is modern day Luxor now at this point. Is that correct? Do I have that? I think on that. I think so. Just because I was there recently, I was in Luxor, and I remember over this in May. So right around my birthday, and I remember that I was trying to figure out where the name Luxor came from, and I think it ends up being I think it ended up being Arabic. I'm not really sure, but I remember going to the temples there, Karnak temple at Luxor, and seeing that this was a city that was primarily political as a temple city, whereas you go a couple of miles north to Dendera, and I mean one of the most impressive places I've ever been in my life, and I wasn't expecting it. We just kind of randomly ended up there on Mother's Day, right? The temple to Hathor, the Great Mother, and that was off the beaten track. That was specifically priestcraft, and you can still feel the Heka, coming off the walls there. But what I'm interested in is what drew you to working with this particular section of the PGM.
Well, it was a spell that I do in my practice, and I also do professionally because I use it to make objects magical, to impart the virtues of the sun to an item. And I was a few years ago, the founder of Astromagia conference reached out to me, J.D. Kelly, and he asked if I would give a presentation at this new astrological magic conference that they were starting up. And I said, well, I don't really know that I'm qualified to do that. And he talked me into it. He said he would really love if I could speak about some of my PGM work. So I thought about it, and I thought, well, I guess this is kind of astrological because it's related to the sun and asking the blessings of the sun. So I was like, okay, well, I'll talk about my experiences with this, but let me do a little extra research to round out my presentation. So as soon as I started to do a little extra research to round out my presentation, I found a gold mine. And honestly, that's like every time I go to research something from the PGM, it's like you scratch the surface a little bit and you're like, wow, there is so much here. So I'm part of this PGM study and practice group on Facebook, and it's got a lot of really great scholars, and we've got a lot of really smart people in there. And we had discussed this spell and a similar spell that's also in the PGM that calls out the forms of the sun and the hours. But those two spells are different. So it's like, all right, in the first hour, you've got the form of a cat. And the other one is like, in the first hour, you have the form of a young monkey. So we could never really resolve those, and folks weren't entirely sure what was going on there. But as I started researching the series of 12 animals that are listed in this spell, so it calls on the sun, and it mentions that the sun has 12 different forms, and that each form should grant a boon, with the exception of 2 forms that do not grant anything. So I started looking for the series of these 12 animals, and I found that they actually occurred on an artifact. So there was a bronze artifact called the Cairo Zodiac, or Tabula Dorasi, which has 2 rings in it, with the outer ring being the traditional zodiac that we're familiar with, and the inner ring being these 12 animals that are mentioned in the spell. So with that information, I started researching that artifact, and I found that a PGM era astrologer named Tusser, or Tukris, had written about those 12 animals and referred to them as the Dodecaoro. So looking more into that, I was able to find Franz Boll's work on Tusser, and it really kind of unlocked the spell for me. And then after I had done the presentation at Astromagia, I decided to work this into a paper.
That's great. Yeah, in looking over the publication, I was struck by a couple of different things. So what I was seeing is probably, having to do with my particular disposition. What I was seeing was again exemplary of that time and of that place, right? Because 2 cultures as massive as Egypt and the Hellenistic tradition, the Greek tradition, they can't really come into contact with each other, especially not for 500 years, without influencing each other to a degree where I think a perfect synthesis happens. And so what I'm finding in the work is that, there are Platonic terms that are specific to Greek philosophical cosmology, particularly daimones, the diamonds, and the reference to the sun as the good diamond of the world. And I'm also seeing a blend with this, this 12-fold, this system of as you say, the dodecaoros, in the funerary texts of ancient Egypt. You see 12 gates, 12 hours, things like that, passing through the underworld and coming from the light of day and passing into the underworld by way of the 12 gates, the 12 hours, kind of this I want to say rite, but I don't know that it is, but it's some kind of spell or mythic narrative of rebirth, which is really interesting to me. And then right at the outset, this is a phenomena that I love. What's called in are the 4 winds, the representatives of the 4 winds. So that's what you also find that in like rituals, like the rituals, greater and lesser and supreme rituals of the pentagram, the newer iterations, of that kind of stuff. They're conflated a lot of the time with the elements, but really what they are is their directions are corresponded to the the four winds. Now, each of those four winds is corresponded, elementally, by the early Greeks, but the reason for their disposition is actually based on the winds, not on the actual elements. The reason why, the fire is in the south is because of, Favonius, the southerly wind, Boreas in the north, cold and dry, etc. So you see that, but what even more blows my mind, in the Taoist alchemical and ritual canons, the first thing they do when they want to consecrate a talisman is call in the regents of the four winds. So my mind was kind of blown, because here I am seeing it again, in the PGM, and it's just really interesting. I thought that was something of note to me that I wanted to mention to you.
Something I want to mention about how some of these techniques are so specific and yet so universal. I went to Thailand a few years ago and spent some time briefly hanging out with Peter Jenks of the Thai Occult. And I got a sakyant and, met some of the Ajarns there. And one of the things that I noticed about Thai magic, now this Thai magic is not influenced by anything else. So these Ajarns, a lot of them are very rural. They're not reading up on Western anything. They don't know anything about that stuff. They just know what they were taught, by their teachers, things like that. So they have some extremely similar techniques, like using a corpse cloth as a wick of a candle for a necromantic candle spell. And you see that exact thing in the PGM, using it as the wick of a lamp.
Wow, that's awesome. It's unbelievable. It's kind of uncanny, that there is. I think that the average layperson unfamiliar with this stuff kind of views it as this hocus pocus, but there really is a very fine tuned formula for these things, and that's kind of what I appreciate about what you've got going on. I like that you strike a balance between the academic and the practical. So how does working stuff like the PGM differ for you than, let's say, the grimoire practices or even other kinds of things that you have done? I'm interested in hearing anything that you may have learned about working with the dodecaauros and the different zodiacal kind of animals.
Well, as far as the difference between my practice with things like Solomonic grimoires and planetary magic versus the PGM, I got into the later stuff first, and it was an easier path to tread because so many other people had tread that path before. So if I want to say, hey, I'm trying to make a Solomonic pentacle, there's a lot of people out there who've done that in our community. Now, I know it's probably overall not really a lot of people, but as compared to the population of Earth per se.
Right.
But when you're talking about like practicing occultists, it's Solomonic pentacles are familiar. A lot of people have heard of them. A lot of people have tried them. And you can say, hey, I'm trying to do this. What do I do? But when you get to a lot of the PGM spells, especially like 7 or so years ago when I started getting into it, you don't have that. So you're kind of trying to forge your own path based on, in some cases, incomplete records. So when we're looking at the Betts translation, the edited by Betts translation of the PGM, we don't see all of the holes that we have in the original manuscripts. So in the Betts version, you'll see like ... or whatever, and it's easy to just kind of let your eye pass over it. But when you're looking at the original texts, it'll be like, oh, we are missing the entire right half of this page, or something like that.
Wow.
Or wow, it just cuts off mid-page. It looks like it was ripped. Or, oh, there's a big hole right in the center. Wow. And we just don't know what those words say. We're guessing.
Wow.
that's part of the challenge of trying to work the PGM, and also as a modern person trying to work this. I remember I went to, it was like a PGM study practice group thing. It was not affiliated with the Facebook group that I'm an admin of, but it was just a bunch of people who decided that they wanted to get together on a little chat thing and talk about starting off the PGM. I was like, oh, cool. Well, I'll join. And this was probably 6 or 7 years ago. So I get there, and everyone is just extremely new to it, and they just open up the PGM and start reading, and it's like, ah, yes, and sacrifice this falcon and do this and like whatever, and everyone was like,
I don't wanna.
they're like, what? Because that's how the PGM was. There's a lot of things that are not good to our modern sensibilities, like harming animals or things like that. But you have to think about the original context of this, especially related to the Egyptian priesthood. So, for example, they actually had temples that bred sacred animals for sacrifices. I've looked up some academic articles on that, and they've even found them where it's like, hey, this is the temple of sacred ibises, and if you need to sacrifice a sacred ibis, that's where you go to get your sacred ibis. So that was just part of the culture.
Yeah, that reminds me of the cult of Apis in Memphis, where they raised the Apis bull, and this bull was like the closest thing that they had in ancient society, like a celebrity. Yeah, and I can't remember. I think at first people were saying that they sacrificed, but now they're saying that they didn't. I've read some literature that says like, no, they let it die of natural causes. It lived a great life. And like when the Apis bull died, all of Egypt mourned. So it's really interesting. Yeah. The way that they took care of these things and bred them for religious purposes. It's fascinating. There's kind of something that you mentioned as well. I like that you bring to the fore in the treatise, Secrets of Helios, the idea of Heka. You really bring it out and kind of talk about it. And that's something that has been fascinating for me. I know that, you're talking about it in the context where like, yes, this was sort of a motive force in the universe. Is that something that it kind of has its own model in your system, that you kind of understand what you're working with? Does it have its own philosophy to you?
Yes. So let me just start by quoting Jan Assmann about Heka and magic, from Magic and Theology in Ancient Egypt, as a way to maybe set the stage for this. Magic in the sense of Heka means an all-pervading coercive power, comparable to the laws of nature in its coerciveness and all-pervadingness, by which in the beginning the world was made, by which it is daily maintained, and by which mankind is ruled. Magic in the sense of a particular discourse is much more specific. It refers to the exertion of the same coercive power in the personal sphere. So the reason why I quoted that in my treatise is that I feel like that's exactly what's going on in the spell. You've got some historiola talking about creation and the sun's role in creation and generation. And then after you've connected to that cosmogonic magic, then you're saying, okay, now bring that into my life and bless this object that I'm trying to consecrate. And one of the ways that I have previously used the spell is now this is not part of the spell from the PGM, but this was me kind of leveraging a little bit of what I knew about Egyptian magic and trying things out. I've done it at sunset before, and I've said, as the sun sets, let the sun set on all of my troubles. And as it rises, let me rise in power. So by tying it to something that is guaranteed to happen, the sun is guaranteed to rise. I will assure you that tomorrow the sun will rise, and the day after that, and the day after that too. So, it's saying, like, with certainty, this result is tied to this result. And in that case where I've used it, I have gotten results in less than 24 hours. And I feel that that is more of what Heka is about. It's these large universal forces as opposed to maybe the smaller ones like you see in folk magic.
Right. Yeah. That's extremely hermetic. The idea of bridging the microcosm and the macrocosm, and which scale are we working on? I love that. I think that that's actually a really brilliant way of working practical magic, actually. And what's interesting to me is when I was even if you look at like the Book of the Gates, right? Again, there's 12 gates. And so you've got Ra on the solar bark, the solar boat, and he's traveling through the 12 gates of the heavens and the underworld. And he's got a retinue, or like an entourage of gods on this bark. And so your inclusion on that bark or that boat implies that you are, as you say, or as from the quote that you read as well, it implies that you are part of the generation and maintenance of creation. And so one of the gods in this particular text is Heka. So it really is brilliant the way that they viewed magic or Heka as a natural force. One thing that I kind of wanted to veer off a little bit on, I like to get everybody's kind of opinion on this stuff, especially people like yourself that have been doing it for a long time. What are your opinions on the mainstream of magic and how it's growing and stuff like that? What are your feelings on the direction a lot of this stuff is taking?
So it's complicated because I feel that the term magic means something different to everyone who uses it these days. And I often you will see conversations on social media where people will start off talking about magic, and then they will immediately switch to talking about mysticism or spirituality, and they won't even notice that they have changed the subject, because to them it's not a subject change. So that's why I like to use the word thaumaturgy for what I do, because there's less confusion as to what I mean. Whereas people, if I say like, oh, I'm into results-based magic, they're like, well, everything's a result. This made me feel better. That's results, and I'm like, okay, but that's psychological, or, they're like, oh, everything's psychological. You just don't know how big your head is. And I'm like, okay, we're having two different conversations here.
Yeah. I mean, that's kind of why I ask, because I'm finding that myself as well.
Yeah. So I mean, first, if you're going to have a conversation about how magic is going these days, you got to figure out what people mean by that. But what I have noticed is that there does seem to be a huge split between people that, kind of want to have more of a nature-based spiritual practice, people that want to apply Jungian archetypes and analysis, to help personal growth, and then there's this other group that I'm in of people that are like, oh wow, these people said that you could do this, and you can heal people with this, and you can do all this. That sounds cool, and I don't believe that that's all fake. I feel like a lot of historians and scholars look at folks that practiced ancient magic and they're like, oh yes, those confused people, they didn't really know about science, and they're oh, look what they believed, haha, we know better now. But if you can just put that aside and just maybe go in with an open mind and say like, well, I don't know, let's try this and see what happens. You can be surprised. So there's one particular spell in the Greek Magical Papyri, and it's against a scorpion sting. And it's very simple. It's just something that you use some symbols that you write down on a piece of papyrus and apply to the sting. So years ago, I was on Facebook, and one of my friends posted that they just got stung by a scorpion when they were moving some wood in their yard. And I was like, hey, can you humor me and do this thing? After determining that they were still in a lot of pain for it and that they had already sought medical attention.
Mm-hmm.
And they said that just drawing these symbols on a piece of paper and applying it took the pain down from a 7 out of 10 to just a little tingle.
Wow.
So this is just like a random person from my friends list. Mm-hmm. So then after that, I've used it for friends that got bitten by a spider. I used it when I got stung by a bee. I've given it to other friends who've been stung by bees. And I used it on a child who might have been stung by a jellyfish at the beach. We were unsure. They were very upset, and it was something that stung them, but it worked. And I'm pretty sure that a small child isn't gonna, not stop crying if it didn't work.
Right. Yep.
So it was more than just, I believe this will work and therefore it's working. I'm giving this to people who don't have that belief, and in fact have quite a lot of skepticism about it, and it still works.
Yeah, that's the amazing thing about this stuff, is that there is a level of, you can verify it. Really, there is an objective component to a lot of it, not all of it, but to a lot of it. So you recently you contributed to the Llewellyn series of zodiacal signs for, I think it's basically the one you contributed to was Scorpio Witch, right? Correct?
Yes, that is correct. My sun sign is Scorpio.
Beautiful.
So he reached out to me to contribute to that. Yes.
Yeah, that's my rising. So were you a contributor, or was it just you and him, or is there anybody else on, or did you apply any of the PGM stuff?
I definitely did not apply any of the PGM stuff. I was asked to write a little biography of a prominent Scorpio, and then I also wrote a little bit about some magical techniques inspired by that prominent Scorpio. So
awesome, cool.
Completely different from my usual writing, other than that it does have practical techniques in it.
And that's really what we can expect from Llewellyn. So that's excellent. So for those listening to our conversation today who might want to learn about a little bit more about the PGM, Western ceremonial traditions of late antiquity, are there any essential texts you might recommend? Of course, you can include anything that you've written.
Well, you've mentioned the techniques of Greco-Egyptian magic by Skinner, which is one of the classic works associated with this. Of course, the Betts edition of the Greek Magical Papyri is right now critical because it's the only English translation. Hadean Press does have other guides to the PGM, including MHH's Necromancy in the PGM. And I'm also eagerly anticipating Brian Alt's Intralinear Magic, which should be potentially coming out this year.
Excellent. And probably the book, the texts that you were listed in, right? The Essential Grimoire, the Grimoire Encyclopedia.
Yeah, the Grimoire Encyclopedia is huge and going to contain information about any sort of grimoire magic that you're looking for. So it's also got stuff about the Solomonic magic I do, and all the various keys of Solomon, in addition to the PGM. So it's a huge, amazing resource.
Alison Chicosky, thank you so much for joining me today. It's a privilege to talk to somebody who's as knowledgeable and dedicated to this stuff as you are. I can tell that you have a great passion for it, and I think that as long as we have people like you working in the field of practical occultism and taking, the rigorous academic scholarship, then we're in pretty good hands. So I appreciate all your work, and I'm excited to see everything else that you're going to have for us in the future.
Thanks so much. Corey and I are definitely working on another guide and have other things in the works.